Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Women in Leadership Talk podcast. We have a very special guest today. Parul Somani is joining us all the way from the Bay Area in California. So Parul, thank you for joining us today. Wonderful to have you here.
Thank you, Vicki. Happy to be here.
Good. Well, we've got a great conversation planned, and we're excited to jump in and learn more about you. But before I do that, I want to give the audience just a little bit of background on who you are, what you do, so they have context. Parul is a life leadership speaker and coach, empowering people and teams to thrive by embracing change with intention. She already has me there. I love that. I love when we're very intentional. So as a cancer survivor, Parul is also an award-winning patient leader and advocate, leading organizations like Oracle, Neiman Marcus Group, Slack, Equinix, and Coinbase have sought Parul for her authentic storytelling, powerful frameworks, and actionable insights. She's also worked with the White House, World Economic Forum, Harvard Business School, and Stanford University, have invited her to come in and share her wisdom, and we're fortunate to have her here with us today. She's also featured in Forbes, Thrive Global, Authority Magazine, and films and books on survivorship and mindset. Previously, Parul led a 15-plus year career as a senior manager at Bain & Company and an executive in Silicon Valley startups. She holds a BS degree in electrical engineering and computer science and a minor in economics from MIT and an MBA from Harvard Business School. And as I said earlier, she resides in the Bay Area with her husband and 2 daughters. So thank you. I know you've got a busy schedule and quite the resume, have done lots of amazing things. So let's jump in and learn, more about your background and this shift from, being an engineer into coaching. So tell us a little bit about that and what led you to be this, patient leader and advocate.
Yes, well, there's a lot of history behind all of that. I would say that I had gone into college thinking I wanted to be a corporate lawyer for a high-tech company. It was a very strange and precise dream for a high school student to have. But it really was what led me to study engineering, thinking that you can study that and then go into law school and be all set for a high-tech company. And it was in college when I realized that I don't actually enjoy coding. I don't actually want to go to, down the engineering route. And then as I actually learned what corporate law is, that didn't necessarily appeal to me either. Mm-hmm. And it was the exposure to other business opportunities like Wall Street and management consulting, were jobs and careers I didn't even know existed when I was in college. But through that exposure, I ended up joining Bain & Company and really loved the work in terms of managing teams, the culture, and advising companies. And in a way, the kind of passion for working on identifying one's intentions and then acting upon it was actually something I was using early on in my career, even in consulting, because that's really what strategy setting is, and figuring out the North Star for your company and, identifying how you're going to implement it and pursue it. And I spent many years doing that. And then being in Bay Area, surrounded by Silicon Valley and startups, wanted to feel like I was part of building something as well, and then made that transition to the startup world. And then it was actually when I was in my early 30s, I had just made that transition into the startup world. I was pregnant with my second daughter, and on her 1-week birthday, right after I delivered her via C-section, I got diagnosed with the stage 2 aggressive breast cancer.
Oh, wow.
And, that has many layers to the story itself, but it was the journey of, going through chemotherapy, going through the surgeries in the year that followed, that helped me also really clarify what is important to me, like what my priorities are, how I want to spend my time, and what that impact is that I want to leave on the world. And initially, I channeled that through a industry shift. Like I stayed in the business side, but instead of, the consumer retail startup that I was at, I shifted into a genomics healthcare startup. And through that, started sharing more of my personal journey as a public speaker in healthcare conferences. I was leading and growing the marketing team there, but through that work was also sharing my personal experiences. And It was in fall of 2019 when I had been invited to deliver the keynote at the grand opening of the new Stanford Hospital and share my experiences as a patient and caregiver, and just was reminded how alive I feel when I'm on stage and how passionate I am about not just the advocacy side of the work in terms of, patient empowerment and improving care across the cancer care continuum, but also recognizing that the mindset and frameworks and tools that had helped me navigate that journey are the same that can help me and others navigate any change, right? Wanted or unwanted, expected or unexpected transitions. And they had helped me not just in that cancer journey, but even in career and professional shifts in the years that had followed. And so in fall of 2019, actually on the exact day of my 5-year remission anniversary, I launched the work that I do now, which I call Silver Linings. And it's really about empowering other people and teaching others and coaching others with those same mindsets and frameworks to help them act with intention and embrace change as well.
Wow. Okay. You've said so many things there. First of all, I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. Very scary, especially just having your second child and all of a sudden you're told you have serious cancer. So I'm sorry that you have had to experience that, but clearly you have taken that and turned it into something very powerful and supportive for others navigating a similar journey. To your point, regardless of whether it's cancer or other illness or just life and how to navigate some of those experiences.
Absolutely.
I can't even imagine how scary that would have been at the time. So very brave, very courageous.
Thank you. Yeah, it was unexpected by everyone because I had also only been 31 years old and I was pregnant when I had first felt the lump. And so everyone was convinced it was likely just a clogged milk duct. And so even recognizing how easy it would have been to dismiss it and, not necessarily pay attention to it again until a year later after I finished nursing when I could actually feel it again. But by then my prognosis would have been entirely different as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like from a timing perspective, not good, but good. Like you caught it at least, early enough that you could take action and actually have treatment and deal with it quickly.
That's absolutely right. I think, even in a time like that, when at one level it can feel like everything's going wrong.
Yeah.
And everything seems like uncontrollable, to actually be able to step back and recognize that there are all of these silver linings.
Yes, I was just going to say that.
In this case, it's like silver linings that you were just kind of looking for, right? And being thankful for that. Well, at least it was caught when it was still treatable. At least I had the support of family and friends to help me through, motherhood and treatment at the same time. And thankfully, I had insurance to help me, to help support me through all of that. But part of the reason I named the work that I now do Silver Linings is because I actually believe that they can really be created, not just passively found and looked for, but with intention and with openness to opportunity, we can actually create the meaning and positive outcomes, through whatever we're navigating.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you on that. And I think sometimes that comes down to very conscious intention, to your point earlier when you were talking about intent, but also just that choice. Right? We have a choice. And so, that mindset becomes such an important aspect of whether we survive or we thrive. And maybe just talk about that, because you had a choice at that time, right? You're a brand new mother. You've just found out you have breast cancer. How did you make that shift mentally to carry on and to thrive? Because clearly you are thriving now. So how did you do that?
I would say that it's a journey and it definitely comes in waves. I think oftentimes when we, think about the stages of grief and the emotional change curve, we tend to think of it as just linear or like in one, one direction, where you start with some shock, you feel sadness, and then you integrate into this new normal and you're thriving. But the reality is that it's a much more of a squiggly line of a chart, and you're actually having these ups and downs and waves. When I first heard the news, I like to think I went into warrior mode, because I was just very matter of fact, trying to understand like the diagnosis, the next steps, what kind of treatments needed. And it was only when the doctor mentioned that, obviously this means you will have to stop nursing, that I actually started tearing up. And in hindsight, I think what I considered myself to be in warrior mode, it was actually just like shock that I was experiencing. And it was a little bit delayed when I was really overcome with the grief and sadness and anger and fear and all of those, what I call, mental traps that are very understandable and natural to have. And I think it's important to recognize that those are okay and normal, to actually experience them and process them and like accept them for what they are. But you're absolutely right in that there is a point where there is a choice of how we choose to respond. Do we, kind of get mired down in those mental traps, or do we decide to move forward and take control in our own way? And for me, again, it was a journey, and it looked different at different points of my process. When it came to the diagnosis itself, like doctors and community would say the importance of being positive and being optimistic. But we really quickly learned that hope is not a course of action. And it was really in doing something that we felt like we were, in a way, just implicitly making that choice that we're going to like take control. And whether that was getting second opinions, whether that was doing our own research, but feeling empowered by whatever it is that we could do. And then when I started treatment, there's sort of another wave of feeling like, okay, there's, again, things out of your control in terms of like side effects and whatnot. And so even in that, like finding those moments of empowerment, like choosing to shave my head when my hair started to fall off, rather than that having that be one more thing that was happening to me. It was in moments like that I was making that choice. I was, diving into that mindset of wanting to thrive from this rather than just get through it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think you said a number of really important messages there, that it's not linear. It is this squiggly line, and that's life, right? Like we all navigate these squiggly lines in different ways. But the important part is how we approach it, right? And when you talked about you picking and choosing the things that you could control, that gave you some of your power back. And that's such an important part of, no matter what we face, finding what gives you the control that you need at that moment, and being okay with that. Like, I can't even imagine how incredibly difficult that was. And, even when you were talking about, being told you can't breastfeed your daughter, right? Like that's for a woman, especially, that is like so crucial, because we're told how important that is. And so that's just another thing, I think, to add to the mix, right? But it sounds like you looked at this more from a holistic perspective and the resilience of, okay, we're going to do what we can. We're going to take action where we can. And so when you think about that shift for you, like personally, when did you notice the shift? Because you clearly found the silver linings, and that's continuing to happen. So how did you know that you were moving in a different direction?
There was actually one very almost like tangible moment, which was related to the fact that I started blogging during my diagnosis and treatment. It was called New Job, New Baby, New Cancer. And it was like partly the scrapbooker in me who just wanted to, document my journey and just capture all of that real time. Part of it was the fact that I had 2 young daughters who thankfully were too young at the time to know what their mother was going through. But I knew that there would be a time in the future where they would want to know, and I would want them to be able to, one, read and hear that experience, but also be proud of how their mom went through it. And then the other part of it was, I wanted the blog to be helpful to others. Like, I wanted it to be a source of experience sharing and inspiration to others who might be going through a journey like that themselves. Because, when I was very young, my mother had actually been diagnosed with early onset breast cancer, and we just never talked about it. And there, are cultural reasons, there's family reasons, that there's stigmas that exist. But because of that early childhood influence, I knew that there's other families, other communities out there that are not talking about it.
Yeah.
And so I had taken this approach that I'm going to be an open book. I'm going to share my journey. And because I wanted my daughters to be proud of it and it to be helpful and inspirational to others, that actually really shaped my own approach to my own attitude, to my own diagnosis, to my own treatment, because I knew that how I felt, both the good and bad of it, was going to be shared in this blog. And I wanted the good and the inspiring and the empowering to outweigh that. And at the same time, I had a college friend of mine who was going through treatment of her own and was blogging as well. And her blog was actually called, F Cancer, which is definitely an approach that many people have. And there is so much unfairness that comes with it, that there is a lot of venting that someone might want to do as well. But for me, it was almost the awareness of that contrast of a similar diagnosis, similarly going through chemotherapy, and yet two completely different approaches to how we want to express this journey. And so that was one of the moments where I felt like I realized my mindset about this is different.
Yeah. Well, and what I heard you say there is you were embodying the resiliency, right? And you were capturing that in a way that your daughters could see it, but also other patients, right? That having that hope and yes, the diagnosis is there, but again, you had a choice as to how you wanted to navigate that. And other people might want to navigate it the way your friend did. But I think that's very inspiring and important to give that hope, right? Not only to the patient, but to those that are living and breathing it with the patient, right? Those family members.
Absolutely. That blog has now been read in 85 countries.
Wow.
And so to me, it's actually just a validation that there is that desire just all around the world to be able to hear from people's real experiences in a way that's educational, but in a way that also gives them that hope and the tools to actually navigate those type of experiences. And like I said earlier, these mindsets and ways of approaching change extend way beyond just a diagnosis or a health issue, because some of the people that I've heard from who have read this blog have talked to me about how it helped inspire them in like their relationships, or just like completely unrelated challenges or setbacks that they were facing in their own lives. And that was very rewarding to hear.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, and again, it goes back to being that inspiration, right? Because, we all live in our own heads, in our own worlds, our own realities. And when you can extract yourself and follow somebody else's path, it helps you put your own life into perspective, right? Like, it's like, wow, like my life is not so bad, right? And so what choices am I making? What am I doing? And you clearly looked at this situation and is finding, that silver lining because that's a big segue from, being an engineer, wanting to be a lawyer, to now being a life coach and advocating for patients. And so how does that feel, from a value perspective and from a connection to yourself? How does that feel for you?
Yeah, it's a great question, because there's definitely a lot of identity shift and evolution that came with that. So I had shared that I initially stayed in the same professional realm, but had just shifted into the genomics space and the healthcare world. And I did love that work, because I felt, again, like I was just kind of bringing my professional expertise, but now into another mission-driven way. And I had actually been unexpectedly laid off from that job, right? And the rational side of me totally understood that. And I've even been on the other side of the table, having, led startups, that there's strategic pivots and business changes that happen, and those type of layoffs need to happen. But because I felt like I had given such meaning to that role based on my personal healthcare journey, there was more grief involved in being laid off than just a job loss. And it was actually the reflection that I went through after my layoff that helped me realize, okay, how I had navigated that diagnosis and in the months and years that had come after that could also help me navigate this job loss. And by the time it was 9 months from losing my job to actually deciding the new thing that I want to do is actually like be self-employed, which is different than I'd ever sort of viewed myself. I'd always viewed myself as a working mother, but in a way where I kind of work for someone and I go to an office and I rise up the ranks, and to kind of embrace that entrepreneurship hat. That itself was a journey, because remember, I launched in fall of 2019. So just a few months after launching, did everything shut down.
Yes, of course.
Someone who, launched the work that I'm doing because I love public speaking, right? Suddenly had all public speaking events come to a screeching halt, and focus going back to homeschooling and, just navigating the pandemic. And I experienced a longer time period where I felt like the work that I'm so passionate about was actually, in a way, getting put on the back burner, because I was suddenly prioritizing everything else that was around me, whether it was family, home, schooling, etc., and struggled with that from an identity perspective, because I didn't want this to just be like a hobby or a side hustle. And so making that mindset shift, and even reminding myself, like, I'm an entrepreneur, and if I want to, invest in this mission and build it, then I need to be able to prioritize it accordingly. And so, when it comes to the evolution and identity, even saying like, I'm not trying to be a speaker, right? Like when I launched years ago, it's like, I am a speaker, I am an entrepreneur, and actually like embracing that change in what it is that you're doing. And another big shift that I had to undergo mentally as well is, I used to frame it as if I had pivoted. I use the word pivot, that I've pivoted from my career from, a management consultant and tech and business executive into my world of leadership coaching and patient advocacy and public speaking and writing. And realizing that it wasn't a pivot, but recognizing it as I'm now channeling that. That itself was a huge mindset shift, because before it felt like I had kind of closed this whole previous chapter of who I had been for like my entire career, and was doing something starting from scratch and new, where when you think of it that way, there's a lot more imposter syndrome involved. There's a lot more like, do I even know what I'm doing? Where when I recognized, actually, it's like 15 plus years of professional leadership experience and expertise that I'm now, and personal experiences like I've shared, that I'm channeling into this new line of work, that suddenly feels much more like empowering, but also like, yes, I have a lot to bring to the table, and I have a strong foundation that I'm just, exercising in a new and different way than what I had done before. So those are just some of the examples of some of the struggles that I've had, but the mindset shifts that have really helped me through them.
Well, I think those are great examples. And, it is empowering. It's powerful. It's also authentic, right? And it's lived. You're walking your talk. So when you can advocate for patients, you're advocating from a place of having been there yourself. And, I think one of our challenges that we often have in our world is that people advocate for causes that they've never personally experienced, right? And it makes such a difference when you've done it yourself. You've been that executive, you've been that leader, you've had all of this expertise, and now you're taking that and you are still using it, because you'll use it every day in the work you're doing, right? But that's super inspiring to others as well, because people go, wow, yeah, like, who am I, right? Because even when you were talking about identity, Parul, like, that's such an important thing, because when you go like job loss, health, you can't feed your baby the way you wanted to. Like, all of those are identity crises, I would say, that we encounter, and it's how we navigate each of those pieces. And it sounds like you've done a great job of, tying it all together, and also to help others. And you clearly sound like you're highly mission driven. So it's, how do you support others? How do you help them navigate and work through those curvy roads that we were talking about a few minutes ago?
Yeah, so I'm very passionate about the patient advocacy side, and that is a huge pillar of the work that I do. I also knew, though, that I didn't want to be just a cancer story.
Yeah.
Right. I always knew that what I experienced, there's insights to be drawn and shared from it, but they're bigger than just navigating a diagnosis. And so I do feel that, being aware of like what my mission is and what I want that to look like is a critical part, and actually then being able to pursue it in a way that you find the right fulfillment from it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and we spend so much time of our lives working, right? Like, you want to link that to where it's in alignment with who you are as a person. So, when you get up to go to work in the morning, it doesn't feel like you're going to work, because it's just a natural extension of who you are and who you're being.
That's right. Vicky, have you heard of Ikigai? The Japanese concept? Yeah, Japanese concept.
No.
It's Ikigai, Ikigai.
Okay.
And in Japan, they actually don't have a term for the word of retirement. They don't.
Okay.
They have the concept of Ikigai, which is your reason for being.
Oh, and I love that.
Or to like, what is it that you wake up, energized to do and are passionate about. And I loved it because it's actually a framework. So the ex-consultant in me is like, yes, the Venn diagram. But it's the intersection of four things. It's what you're good at, what you love to do, what you can be paid for, and what the world needs.
Oh, I love that.
And it's the intersection of the four that is your Ikigai, or your reason for being. Oh. And it's important to recognize that we don't necessarily, graduate college and start serving our Ikigai, right? We probably spend a large portion of our life actually just strengthening each of those four circles, right? Developing skills that we're good at, building a reputation that we can actually get paid for those skills, having hobbies and volunteer service outside of our job that we realize we're passionate about, or helping out the world. And I think the goal, though, is that over time, to be able to actually bring those four circles of our life together and intersect them. And I just feel thankful that the work that I'm doing now, I can call my Ikigai, and that I can say that I've been able to serve my Ikigai at such an earlier sort of chapter in my life.
Yeah.
But would encourage people to kind of have that framework in their own mind too, and think about, who are they across all of these different circles? Because I think we spend so much of our time at the intersection of what we're good at and what we can be paid for. And that's like our job or our profession. But we are so much more multifaceted than that. We have so much, so many more passions and missions that we care about outside of just our job. And the reality is that the world needs, many of us to be thinking about these broader issues as well. And so, recognizing how we can bring that all together in a way that serves the broader community is important.
Love that. Love that. That's beautiful. And I love that you shared that, because that is so true. And I think, to go back to what you said, when you get out of school, you think, oh, I'm going to go do this, right? And it takes time. You got to develop those skills. You got to try things on. Just like you said, you wanted to be a corporate lawyer, right? And then when you really realized what it was, oh, no, that's not really in tech. Oh, I don't want to code. That's not really where I want to be. So you got to kind of step into some of those roles to figure that out. But when you know what you're really passionate about, and if you can figure out how to tie that together, it doesn't feel like you're going to work every day.
No, absolutely. And it's interesting, because I almost feel like what I do now has brought me full circle to who I once was, right? When I was younger, like in childhood, I loved everything, astrology and palmistry related, because I love learning about our potential and what is fate and destiny versus what we have
Mm.
control over and what we can change about ourselves and our lives. I loved going to leadership conferences and learning how to be a stronger leader. And then I somehow ended up on this kind of career path that I never saw myself, like realizing how exactly I stumbled into it. But when I think about the work that I do now, even though I've now come full circle and back on these things around how do we be better, people with better lives and better leaders, which is more true to who I was as a child, I don't think I would have been as effective at it as I can be now if I hadn't gone through that sort of deviation
Of course.
your experiences that have taught me about, okay, how do you work with executives? How do you advise companies? Like what does being a leader look like, and a people manager, and what are those struggles, and parenthood, motherhood, right? Like some of these things it's through those lived experiences that make you better equipped to actually coach and advise others.
Oh my goodness, you are bang on. Yes. So true. So true. And it's so interesting because I like how you tied it back to your younger age, right? Because I think instinctively we do know, and yet we get sidetracked. But those sidetracks are good because they do help shape and inform us so that we can be better advocates. We can have a better voice to different situations. And sometimes we forget to be patient with the journey because we're too busy looking for the destination, right? Yeah.
And kind of getting back to intention, I do think that it takes a conscious effort and that intention to actually try to connect those dots.
Yeah.
Right. Like we've kind of heard the saying about when you look back, and connect the dots, you'll realize they were never random.
Yeah.
But
so true.
It does take that work. There is work that goes into, pulling those different parts of my professional and personal life together to then create the career path that I'm doing now. There's no role model for this career path, like in my, direct life. And so there is something new and uncertain about that, but there's a lot
exciting,
of
creative.
Exactly. Yeah. And so for each person, kind of thinking back to, well, what are the dots of my life and how do I want to connect them, and what picture do I want to create out of them, looking forward.
Absolutely. You reminded me of a conversation I had a couple of years ago with a woman who had just left her job, and she resigned. She wasn't let go, but she resigned. And so I said to her, I said, so now what? And she went dead quiet, didn't say a word. And I was like, are you there? I thought I lost her, right? And she said, no one's ever asked me. And worse than that, I've never thought about it.
No.
And I went, really? And she goes, yeah, things have just always happened. And I said, well, that's interesting. I said, maybe it's time for you to think about what would you want, right? And so we painted a blank canvas and looked at what would be the things you would want. And she said, I'm embarrassed that I've never taken the time to really think about it. And I think that happens to a lot of us, right? We get out of school, we get a job, we're not really thinking about, you go through the life moments, and sometimes it takes illness or big events that get us to pull back and really look at our life and what do we want to be? How do we want to impact the world? Because we're not just here, like, make it purposeful. Yeah.
I do fully agree with you. I think so few of us carve out that time and space to actually go through that introspection process and the reflection of, what is it that we actually want? Are we on that path? Are there changes we would actually want to make? And even when I lost my job, I did initially think like, okay, I'm going to be intentional about taking a few months off, be present with my kids, and then I'll just go back and work for another healthcare startup. And what I realized is that every 3 months, what I thought I wanted to do was actually very different. And had I not given myself that time and space, and I fully acknowledge it's a luxury to be able to do that. Not everyone necessarily has the luxury to take that time off, but I'm thankful that I was able to spend those months realizing that what I thought I wanted has actually changed once I've given myself the space to reflect on that and reflect on how have my priorities maybe evolved to change the path that I want to, look to next. And it was that journey that led me to realize, actually, I want to be self-employed. Like, I don't mind working hard if it's something that's like my own. And I didn't realize that 3 months after my job loss. And I very easily would have just stayed on the hamster wheel of, one company to the next. And so when that opportunity arises, if the luxury is there to carve out that space, I think it's so important.
Yeah, I agree.
But that alone itself did also come with its own kind of identity crisis, because I had gone to Harvard Business School. I had always been on this career path where you are always kind of striving for the next thing, and to meet people and have them ask you, so what do you do? And to not have a clear answer to that comes with like a company name and a title that's very easily understood was very awkward. And I would find myself like kind of, just regurgitating my entire resume and then awkwardly ending with, but I'm taking a break now and figuring out my next thing. And, it takes time to get comfort, find comfort with that change and with that evolution. But I did find that whenever I did share with people that I'm carving out that space and trying to really figure out what the right next thing is for me, I was, always responded with this feeling like, oh, I wish I could do that, or I've wanted to do that. There's always that desire from others to do it as well. Whereas I was just in my own head thinking that like, I don't have a good answer. But really there's not an answer people are looking for. What they really just want to know is, what do you enjoy doing? What are you passionate about? So now when people ask me, so what do you do? I turn it around and say, well, what I'm most passionate about is, and then I fill in the blank.
Nice. So true. It's so true. You don't have to have a full answer. So Parul, tell us what, if anything, that you would like to maybe share that I haven't asked you today.
Sure. Well, there's so much that I could continue chatting about. I will say that the main takeaway here is that when it comes to acting with intention and embracing change, it is a journey, and it is a muscle that we learn to exercise, right? It's not about just trying to be positive all the time or trying to be happy all the time. It's recognizing that the emotional roller coaster is real. The early stages of grief are real, and those are important emotions. But ultimately, there is that decision point. There is that choice, and how you choose to respond to what happens to you in life can have a bigger influence on what your life actually feels like, and how fulfilling it is, and how few regrets you will have at the end of it. And so I really just encourage people to approach their day-to-day with that mindset, and recognize that if they exercise it every day, it'll also come that much easier to them over time.
Oh yeah. And even just practicing with the small things, right? Like catching the good things, catching the positive things, versus always going to, oh, it's raining. Oh, well, that brings May flowers or June flowers, or yeah.
You can't have rain without rain. So. And also that, if people are interested in learning more about the work that I do, or, other tips on how to embrace change, manage stress, act with intention, I, welcome them to join my mailing list. My website is parulsomani.com. Also designingsilverlinings.com, if that's easy.
I love that.
For folks to remember. And then I'm on social media if they'd like to follow that as well.
Awesome. So Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok.
Not TikTok, actually. I've never ended up joining, but primarily LinkedIn and Instagram are the main ones that, the links for all the social profiles are on my website also.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Pearl, thank you so much for joining us today. You have such a beautiful story, and thank you for having that mindset shift and really finding the silver lining. Like, that's so inspirational to, just to hear your story and how you made that shift and how you use that constantly in different ways and help others to be able to do that. So we're grateful for you for being here. So thank you.
Thank you, Vicki. One more thing I forgot to mention is that I am actually writing a book about this specific topic. And so hopefully I will be able to share more with your listeners down the road on my playbook for acting with intention.
Oh, lovely. Okay. Well, let me know when you have it done, and we'll have you back on to talk about the book. How's that sound?
That sounds great. Thanks so
Awesome.
much, Vicki.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I want to thank our audience for joining us today. Great conversation with Pearl, and so inspirational to, just to hear her story and how important it is for us to make that choice in how we view things. So spend some time practicing and taking some of the examples that she gave with how to shift that mindset. And, again, thank you for joining the Women in Leadership Talk podcast, and we will look forward to seeing you on our next show. Take care, everyone.